welcome back to another episode of the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. This is week 4 of our Summer of Madness series, and today Joey and I will be having an affair with Thomas Ligotti and his short story, The Frolic. The Frolic is a chilling psychological horror story which was written in 1982, making it one of Ligotti's earliest published stories. It first appeared in his debut collection, Songs of a Dead Dreamer, which was released in 1986 and later revised and expanded in 1989. So way before you were born, Joey, this was a thing. The Frolic explores the fragile boundary between normalcy and madness. The story unfolds as Dr. David Monk, a prison psychologist, becomes increasingly disturbed after interviewing a child murderer named John Doe. Doe speaks very cryptically about taking children on quote-unquote frolics, suggesting he frees them from their earthly forms to join him in a mysterious, otherworldly realm. As Monk recounts the interview to his wife, unsettling details emerge, particularly Doe's inexplicable knowledge of their daughter's name, which is not a common name. The story builds dread through quiet domestic scenes, culminating in a horrifying revelation that shatters Monk's sense of safety and reality. Ligotti's tale is a masterclass in atmospheric horror, using philosophical unease and subtle supernatural hints to evoke terror without any overt violence. It's a standout from his collection, Songs of a Dead Dreamer, and a haunting introduction to his unique brand of what he calls weird fiction. Interestingly, Ligotti has described The Frolic as one of his more normal, in quotes, so this is a normal horror story, according to Ligotti, crafted to deliberately explore conventional narrative structure. That choice made it uniquely adaptable for film, and it was later turned into a short movie co-scripted by Ligotti himself. And so,
I didn't
Joey,
know that.
before I go any further, I wanted to say thank you for bringing this amazing piece of literature into my life. And I'm super curious, how did you first encounter this author?
I am so shook that you said you're excited about this one. It doesn't seem like one that you would particularly gravitate towards, but I just happen to have his short story collection. Well, this is 2 collections, but Songs of a Dead Dreamer is in here and Grimscribe. So I had this for years, but I legit thought it was just 2 novellas for some reason. And then I must have seen it somewhere recently online, and I was like, "Oh, I have that. Let me take a look. I want to read some of that." And I was like, "Oh, this is all short stories, and so I should read it." That's literally the first story that I read. It's the first story in this collection. It's a very odd cover here, but I was like, "Whoa, this is weird, and it's good weird." There's a lot of stuff that stuck with me. A lot of I have to like really sit and think about this story because it's so sort of ordinary and mundane, but it's very shocking.
Straight up weird, Joey. We can say it. We can say it. He self-professed that this was weird fiction.
Mhm.
I am very excited to tell you after we do another little bit of a bio for him of why I was so captivated by this particular story. Knowing me as you do, maybe not Jennifer's jam, but I think through the course of our exploration of various types of literature that I normally don't dabble in, I think my range is definitely expanding in a good way. So we will see. Who is Thomas Ligotti, other than the man who is hiding in plain sight on your bookshelf, Joey? I don't know who this man is. So I did a quick internet search, and it said Thomas Ligotti is a reclusive American author born in Detroit in 1953. My Michigan people represent, as we always say. His work has quietly but profoundly reshaped the contours of literary horror. That's also a genre that I'm normally not dancing around in, but here we
Yeah.
are. Drawing from philosophical pessimism and the shadowy corners of consciousness, Ligotti's fiction melds Gothic tradition with cosmic horror and a bleak existential vision. He is often likened to H.P. Lovecraft for his atmosphere of dread. Ligotti diverges by turning that terror inward, probing the unsettling nature of self-awareness and reality itself. His stories are not merely eerie, they are deeply cerebral existential puzzles that evoke Kafka's surrealism and nihilistic despair, all while challenging the very notion of identity and meaning. Not to mention, last but not least, his extensive, amazing, totally precise vocabulary. I am in
Mhm.
love with this person's craft. Would you like to share with us your initial impressions of the Frolic?
As I said, I had this collection for a long time, so I'm glad that I finally picked it up because I was like, whoa, who is this man and why am I sleeping on him? Like, this is really well written. I'm glad that he's categorized as literary horror because this is literary writing. This is not genre fiction writing, not to bash anyone that writes genre fiction. It could still be excellent, but this is like next level writing. This is elevated writing. He put a lot of work and effort, as you also called out already. His prose is beautiful. It's a beautifully written story, and his vocabulary is extensive. But I think this story really relates to the last story we just read, Paranoia by Shirley Jackson, because it is really this mundane setting. It's just a husband and a wife, David and Leslie, who are just your average all-American heterosexual couple. The man goes to work and the woman is the homemaker, just like in Paranoia. So we have a very similar dynamic there. And it's something that is very easily identifiable with a lot of readers. And you said this was written in 1982. So this is an easily identifiable dynamic that people in 1982 now. I wasn't alive in 1982, but from what I can see, this was still certainly something women could stay home if they wanted to and raise the family as the men went to work. Did they have to do that in 1982? I don't think so, not anymore, but they could do that. They had the financial stability to do that.
Yeah, and Joey, I love the echo that also in this story, she greets her husband with a drink. He comes home from the office, he's having a tough time. She's like, let's just have a drink. And I thought that was just such an interesting parallel, as you said, with Paranoia. These are separated by 30, 40 years in time. And I'm also hearkening back to it could be 2025 with the resurgence of trad wives, right? This is not a trope that is going to go away apparently in my lifetime. So it's just a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, we could see that pretty clearly. That you can't really place this in time. There's really nothing that I can remember now that is time specific, other than knowing that when it was written and published, there's nothing to really ground us. There's no type of technology or mentions of certain brands that may not exist at that time. There's a universality of this story, which I think always is something that we call out and say, that's great literature. When I can't place it, when I can say this could happen in any time period, I mean, there has to be cars at least, I guess, and prison systems, that
And
has to be,
psycho
that has to
killers.
exist. Yeah,
That's
I
a
feel like those
thing.
are probably around forever.
Flannery O'Connor, we're looking at you, babe.
I will get into it a little more, but I'll wrap up by just saying there is something that really stuck with me, and it's the word frolic and how Thomas Ligotti manipulates that word and makes it into such an insidious and sinister word when we don't have that association previously. Well, at least I sure didn't. There is a term for what he's doing, but I will get into that.
Well, great. I definitely look forward to hearing that, Joey. So I was really excited to dive into this story and I was very unsettled. I will not lie. It was unsettling. I was like, where is this going? I read it in one sitting because I had to get to the end and figure it out. And one of the things that I really appreciated right off the bat, as you just mentioned, Frolic is the title, the Frolic. Frolic means something different to me than it does in this story. And I think it's very interesting. I'm going to say something that you normally say, establishing the status quo. We are going to read the opening paragraph and the ending paragraph and see how the author is masterful crafting of the story, that we have these two bookends to the story and you are left in a very, very different state at the end of the story than when you started the story. And I really appreciated that. So Joey, I wanted to just take us to the story structure because this really set me off to start the story. And I just want to read the opening paragraph because we are immediately in the story. And here we go. In a beautiful home in a beautiful part of town, the town of Knowlgate, site of the state prison, Dr. Monk examined the evening newspaper while his young wife lounged on a sofa nearby, lazily flipping through the colorful parade of a fashion magazine. Their daughter, Norleen, was upstairs asleep, Or perhaps she was illicitly enjoying an after-hours session with the new television she'd received on her birthday the week before. If so, her violation went undetected by her parents in the living room, where all was quiet. The neighborhood outside was quiet too, as it was day and night. All of Knowlegate was quiet, for it was not a place with much of a nightlife, save perhaps at the bar where the prison's correctional officers congregated. Such persistent quiet made the doctor's wife fidgety with her existence in a locale that seemed light years from the nearest metropolis. Thus far, Leslie did not complain of the lethargy of their lives, because we are immediately placed into this very bucolic, very calm, but as we will talk about later, Joey, foreshadowing. There are all these seeds of things that come back and bite us by the end of the story. And it's like, this is not as beautiful as it seems.
Yeah, I love how the status quo is set up in this story. That will always attract me to a story or to an author was when I'm like, you got it. You sold me on this. I understand exactly what you're trying to set up. And it's very reminiscent actually of The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, because in the opening scenes of that, we are introduced to an all-American town in the heat of the summer. The kids are running out and playing, you know, everyone is doing all the normal societal things that they're supposed to be doing in this random rural town in a small town America. And the same thing is happening here. It's like, okay, yeah, I can picture exactly what Ligotti is trying to make us understand. And he communicates it in such a beautiful way. And it's so succinct. I think that's also something that I'm always impressed by, is when an author can summarize everything that I just said, but in such a beautiful, and I wouldn't say his prose is poetic, but it's definitely literary, I would say.
Joey, I completely agree with you, because I thought, while this is not Virginia Woolf-esque in kind of any way, the beautiful language, I'm like, this man is a poet in his heart. There are just so many beautiful combinations of words. They're so specific and in some ways obscure. I think you and I both enjoy reading. We enjoy playing with words and the playfulness that can come with that. I highlighted, it felt like a quarter of the story, because pretty much any paragraph, one sentence in there is going to make you go, wow, that is a great sentence. It's just really that good. And I definitely appreciate that. Would now be a good time for us to talk about the foreshadowing elements, since some of those seeds of plot points and details we need to pay attention to are presented in that first paragraph.
You should do that.
Perfect. What is foreshadowing? So I looked it up to make sure we have a definition that we can all agree on. Foreshadowing is a literary device in which authors hint at plot developments that don't actually occur until later in the story. Foreshadowing can be achieved directly, or it can be achieved indirectly by making explicit statements or leaving subtle clues about what will happen later in the text. The Russian author Anton Chekhov, our old friend, Mr. Chekhov, summarized foreshadowing when he wrote, "If you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter, it absolutely must go off. The description of the gun on the wall, in other words, should foreshadow its later use." And I think that that was a really beautiful way that he plants these seeds that if you read the story more than once, I think they will become very, very obvious. And I read it the first time, and then I had to take a break for a day and sort of let the meaning of the story settle in. And then reading it again, even though I knew the outcome, I was not any less interested or excited or tuned into the story on the second reading. So, Joey, what was your experience with that? Because you've read it multiple times as well.
Yeah, I think he does a great job of building that existential dread, which I think Edgar Allan Poe does. We're talking about Poe a lot, or at least I am. He builds existential dread so that you're constantly sort of like building up, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Oh my God, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? But, and if you were to like explain this story to someone, you read the synopsis, but if you were to kind of give someone like a play-by-play, scene-by-scene, people would probably be like, I don't get it. It doesn't seem that tense. But while you're reading it, because Ligotti is such an amazing writer, that it's really a subtle tension that it keeps building. There's so many different parts of the tension too. So it's like the dynamic between David and Leslie, and their inability to communicate, or David's, I should say, let's call a spade, you know what I'm saying? Classic, men cannot communicate their feelings and women have to do the emotional labor, you know. There's tension there, and then there's tension as he starts to slowly reveal this information to his wife. You can kind of understand why he wouldn't want to give her all of this information. I mean, she's an adult and she can handle it, okay? She's a grown adult. But to be fair, I feel she had a right to know that this stuff was going on and that there was this sort of coded threat, which, is it a threat? Is this just a coincidence? Is it a grammatical error? You know, I don't know. And I think that is one of those things that it's like a puzzle within this story. Is this a direct threat towards Norlene, which is such a strange name, but okay. The foreshadowing is extremely well done. I don't think it's explicit in this case. Well, maybe because we know there's an open window in Norlene's bedroom. That's pretty explicit, but I think the rest is kind of more implicit throughout the story. And I mean, bravo. It's hard to find a story that really builds dread that successfully.
And Joey, I think some of that tension as well is that when Leslie raises a concern, she's like, should we be worried? Is this a dangerous town? And he's like, no, honey, it will be fine. If a prisoner escapes, they are going to have self-preservation as job one. They are going to get as far away as possible. And the wife says, well, John Doe doesn't seem like the typical person you've been dealing with. Do you think he would also have that drive to get away? And he's like, oh, he couldn't escape. Just don't even worry about it. So we get this fear, and then the husband reassures. And it's like, I'm going to go check on my kids. So he goes upstairs. He sees her peacefully sleeping. It's a warm night. The window's open. He lowers it a little bit. She's snuggling with this Bambi stuffed animal. And he's like, oh, everything's good. He comes down and says the normal thing. He says to his wife, our kid is safe. Let's just have another drink. It's time for some adult time. Let's just enjoy ourselves. And I thought that was also just an interesting piece that was woven through the story. So Ligotti is the age of my parents. And so I feel like I have a little bit of insight possibly into his worldview because I grew up with parents who were also generationally his equivalent. And so the idea of like the kids are in bed, we should have a drink, the intoxicant of the masses, everybody's going to have a drink. And then they had another drink. And then they were on their third drink when the disaster struck. And I was like, well, maybe if my parents weren't drunk downstairs, I wouldn't have been kidnapped. But, you know, I don't know. It's just speculation. I don't know. Evil's going to happen when evil does. But it was just a very interesting, when the tension gets raised, it gets lowered. And we're like, oh, okay, that's not what's going to happen. And then you're like, everything's fine. It's like, no. He didn't just hear a weird noise that they both stopped and went, did you hear something? And it's like, I think I did. And Joey, we will, I'm sure, go to that passage, but I just really wanted to emphasize and support your point of this tension building and then a little bit of relief. You can let your breath out, but then it's like, something's still weird. Very weird.
Yeah. And I think that's important in these types of stories to have those moments where you're sort of being assured that everything is going to be okay, being lulled back into, oh, surely this is not going to happen. The worst case scenario is not going to happen because David seems like he has his stuff together. And of course, I'm going to believe him. He's a psychologist. He has a sort of prestigious job, and he got to choose to fulfill this role because he thought it would be challenging. So obviously he is intelligent. So it's very easy to fall into that dynamic with these characters to be like, okay, yeah, sure. He pats us on the head and keeps us going with our day. But I wanted to talk about, because this is our Summer of Madness, as you coined, and I love that, where David isn't really descending into madness. If we think about the protagonist of The Yellow Wallpaper, that's pretty clear. With Paranoia, we can see Mr. Brusserford, we can see his descent into madness. And the protagonist of 3 Drops of Blood feels pretty much like he was already there, as I've said. He was already mad. But in this case, I think what Ligotti does is show us that the world is actually what's mad. And we get to see the unraveling or the crumbling of this facade of normalcy. And the impetus for that is No Name, or John Doe, which, by the way, side tangent, I was getting some Greek myth vibes from this story. First of all, Aphrodite was certainly in it. She's a statue that and when as I was reading it this last time, they kept calling him, they said, oh, is he No Name? And then Leslie's like, oh, do you call him that? And they say, oh, no, he's John Doe. And of course, it makes me think of Odysseus when he tells the Cyclops he is no one. What an interesting thing to do, and then mention Aphrodite. It's very clever.
Does not seem coincidental, Joey. He's taking us somewhere, subtly giving us clues for those of us who have had that experience of reading the Odyssey.
Yeah, I don't think that was an accident. Thomas Ligotti obviously did that on purpose. Or maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't know. But I think that's what's so beautiful about this story is that it's a slow sort of descent. Well, we're kind of all descending at that point. David and Leslie and us as the reader are all being like, oh my God, I think the world is actually messed up. First, we have the false sense of security. So that could be David patting us on the head, or it could be the physical prison where the thick prison walls and security staff, you're staying in there, hopefully. The odds of you escaping are slim. And then we have the crack in reality when David learns more about John Doe and his crimes, his frolicking, which I do want to go back and talk about why that is so just unsettling. And then we have the erosion of meanings. The word prison no longer can hold the same security for us because John Doe says, I can walk out of here whenever I want. I'm here because I want to be here, not because I have to be here. I chose to get caught and arrested, and I'm going to choose to walk out when I want to walk out. And then we have the revelation, which is when he finds that he's like, wait a minute, you didn't give Noreen that Bambi doll? Well, I definitely didn't. And then his worst nightmare comes true, which John Doe escapes and steals his daughter. So,
And leaves a
bravo.
note
Yes,
in
and leaves a
Bambi.
note.
So I was like, well, just in case you didn't get all of the clues that I was going to ruin your family and ruin your life, I'll just leave you a note and sign it.
And he mutilates that doll.
Just a precursor of what he's going to do to your kid. It was really, really creepy. It was bad. It was really bad, Joey. I would love for just one moment to think about, I heard what you said, like we are watching this very placid, normal life start to get eroded. And David comes home and he says something to the effect to his wife of like, we probably need to talk about this because I think you know what's going on before I did. I've made a mistake by bringing us here. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to give my notice. I can't work at this prison anymore. I'm afraid something might happen to our family. I got to go. And she's like, okay, good. I'm not going to gloat. And it's similar to what happened in Paranoia, that the characters often congratulated themselves by having emotional restraint, by regulating their own emotions and not dumping them on someone else. They're like, I'm so good because I didn't humiliate my husband when I had a chance to, right? She says things like that. And it's like, okay, that is an interesting perspective. Thank you, author, for putting that in there for us to contemplate. Also, Joey, one of those interesting coincidences that we read stories that then somehow magically, I don't have another word for it, echo each other. So the paranoia that starts happening with David, he seems pretty normal. And then he was like, I think everybody in this place, they're not even worthy of my time and attention. He started with these high ideals. He's like, I'm going to do something important. And that got knocked out of him pretty quickly by reality. And I think that was also a very interesting undercurrent in the story because back to No Name, John Doe, when he interrogates him and says, where were you born? And he says something like, which time? So you get this weird, I'm like, are you the devil? Are you some supernatural force? Because you said you come and go as you please. Walls cannot contain you. He obviously broke out of this prison somehow. He has all of this knowledge that you couldn't know. He speaks like 15, 20 different languages. He makes a note of saying, I just love all the languages you guys have here. Where? In Indiana? Like he's in the middle of nowhere. There's not a language there. They got two languages. They are on and off. There's not really a lot of other cultural touchstones from when I was hanging out in those places. So it was just such an interesting open-ended question of who is John Doe? And I love that he anonymized it because that guy is clearly nuts. But then David says, I sort of see his point. There's this poeticness in the language of this crazy man talking to me. And I also just thought that was so interesting from the standpoint that he first dismissed everyone as being awful. All of his patients were just unworthy. And then he starts to admire this crazy guy. And then he's like, wait, am I losing my mind? Because I should not be admiring this guy. So when you talk about who's going mad and who's not, all of us are to some degree. And I'm really grateful that you brought that to our attention.
Yeah, I want to read that section that you were just talking about when he is like, oh, I want these people to become fertilizer, because I thought that was super unsettling and kind of shocking to hear David say that. David, we know each other. We've known each other for so long. How dare you say that? Because he starts to sort of like vacillate into different emotions so dramatically. And I'm like, that seems pretty crazy to me.
Would that make him a big meanie? Wasn't
Yeah.
meanie one of the
Oh, and
words
then
that was in there?
yeah,
Don't
and that's weird
be a
stuff.
big meanie. Mm-mm.
Yeah, that's weird, infantilizing. But yes, okay, there's so many things we have to talk about. Ligotti writes, I used to believe in rehabilitation, not a purely punitive approach to criminal behavior. But those people, those things at the prison are only an ugly stain on our world. The hell with them. Just plow them all under for fertilizer, I say. Dr. Monk then drains his glass until the ice cubes rattled. Want another? Leslie asked with a smooth, therapeutic tone to her voice. David smiled now, his illiberal outburst having purged him somewhat of his ire. Let's get drunk and fool around, shall we? He starts the story very logical and is restrained, and he starts to show this weird other side of himself where he's like, I don't want to rehabilitate any of these people. I want them to die, and I want their bodies to be, broken
Like
down in some.
desecrated,
Yeah.
right?
And then he wants to have sex with his wife after he just said he wants to turn people into fertilizer. And that's messed up. And that's pretty crazy, David.
He was 3 drinks in at that point, Joey. I know
That's
that it's
true.
not an excuse, but I can understand that his mask, as we often talk, like what is your public appearance? What is your persona? What is your place in society, that you have to try really, really hard to hold it together? And the sanctity of the home, he was like, okay, wife, like, let's get real. I just totally blew it. We got to get out of here. This is just not going to work out. And one of the things when I was looking at foreshadowing, that they talked about red herrings. So you think when he goes up to check on his daughter and nothing happened, it's like, oh, she's there, she's snuggled in. And he talks about maybe she's too old for stuffed animals. But as a psychologist, he realizes that he's not able to take away, and the word he used, a childish comfort. So again, it's really cementing us into this liminal space where this child is young, but she also got her own TV. And it's just kind of like, where is this child in her life continuum? That the red herring for me was, oh, everything's fine. I came down and I told my wife, don't worry. That was just my imagination. I'm paranoid. And that, again, Joy, sorry, circling back to our story from last week, there is this sense of paranoia a little bit with David, because he was very like, no, everything's under control. Wait, I heard a noise. Wait, what is with this Bambi stuffed animal? Where did that come from? And we start questioning, wait, neither you nor I have any offspring of our own, so we don't always know how that is. But I can imagine in a family unit, the wife thinks the husband did something, the husband thinks the wife did something, and it actually was a third party. If somebody gives Frank something, it probably came from you. It's not going to be some, oh, well, maybe my imaginary person did. No, this came from me. So I just thought that was also very interesting, the tension in, you can't know exactly 100% what reality is, because you are assuming and taking a very big risk to know that your partner has your back. And in this case, neither one of them had their eye on the ball because they never thought this could happen to them.
Yeah. The decision that Ligotti made to make it a Bambi specifically stuffed animal, because most people have probably seen Bambi, I would imagine. It's messed up. Okay. It's just this very pure, innocent forest dwelling creature. Okay. It's so innocent. It can barely stand. It can't take care of itself. It can't defend itself. It matches up with his decision to use the word frolic when John Doe is describing his crimes. When David asks John Doe, or No Name, why does he think he's in prison, his response is for frolicking. And there's a few more mentions of frolicking in general. And then he, of course, as you mentioned, says, why are you being so mean, meanie? Like, he's infantilizing his language, even though he's very articulate. He can speak many, many languages. He seems to be very educated, but still uses such simplistic language. So that's very odd and unsettling too. Also, his victims are children, so that makes sense. The word frolic and the fact that the story is called Frolic is what has stuck with me, because I'm like, that's messed up, because that's not a word that I would ever have context for, to have this negative connotation all of a sudden. I was really trying to think, like, what other word would work as well as frolic? And I can't think of one. To define frolic, so we're all on the same page, is an animal or a person that's playing and moving about cheerfully, excitedly, or energetically. What this is actually called, because I didn't know what it was, it's called antiphrase. Never heard of that word, but it's usually ironic or humorous use of words in senses opposite to the general accepted meanings. So I would not have known that that was a word to assign to that, but that's exactly what he's doing. And I think that's just such an unsettling aspect and detail to this story, is that that is the only way that he identifies his crime, John Doe. And there's not really a lot of description about what exactly he did to his victims. We know that he was collecting them from a school nearby, but we don't know exactly what he was doing. The only instance that we do get some detail is because Leslie buys the memorialized head of his latest victim, which I would like to read really quick.
Can I just give you a counterpoint to Frolic? Because I did find the definition that you had, and I'm like, I think there has to be a deeper meaning. One definition of frolic means full of fun, or merry was one of the similar words. It also used to amuse oneself, to make merry, to play and run about happily. Or the final, if you're using frolic as a noun, because in the sentence we don't know what the frolic is, what way they're using this, a playful or mischievous action. And so there are some layers of, when I hear frolic, it is, as you said, it's deer bouncing over fences, eating grass, having a lovely time, puppies rolling around in clover, kitten milk. That's a frolic. I probably wouldn't ever put myself into that story that I'm going to have a frolic. It to me is a very animalistic type of thing.
I would say, like, oh, I want to frolic in a meadow of wildflowers or something. I don't have a.
Okay, I'll go with you, Joey, but I think probably frolic is a very, as you stated, a very, very specific type of word that evokes joy, happiness, contentment, safety. You don't frolic when you think your life is in danger, correct? And
Yeah,
it's just an interesting word choice, as you said. What would be an equivalent word to stick in there? Don't have a clue.
yeah, I don't. I've tried to think and I cannot think of one. Okay, I just wanted to read that one paragraph that is the description of that head. Okay, so it says, Dr. Monk now plunged into the depth of sobriety, which can only be reached by falling from a prior alcoholic height. He looked at the object. Of course he had seen it before, watched it being tenderly molded and caressed by creative hands until he sickened and could watch no more. It was the head of a young boy, a lovely piece discovered in gray formless clay and glazed in blue. The work radiated in extraordinary and intense beauty, the subject's face expressing in a kind of ecstatic serenity, the convoluted simplicity of a visionary's gaze. Beautifully rendered paragraph there, and it's a very disarming description as well, because he's using words like serenity, and the color blue is typically not associated with violence, and he's using his hands for creative purposes. She's explaining why she bought it, because she says that it's good to encourage people who are in the prison system to use their hands creatively instead of for destruction. So we have this weird juxtaposition there.
And Joey, I appreciate you calling that out, because again, she bought that as a present for her husband. She was giving him, I want to say, kind of a peace offering. I got this for you, and I just really want to let you know that I support what you're doing. It sounds like I'm not, but I really am. And of all the things in the gift shop from the prisoners who made them, what are the chances she's going to pick up the one thing that she finds exquisitely beautiful? And objectively, it is a beautiful object when you don't know the history of it. And the husband's like, get this out of my house now. You've got to take that back. He said, you have to take it back soon, because we're not going to live here long. And in my Jennifer world, you give me something that I know one of my patients has carved, who is a child killer, I'm probably going to smash it with a sledgehammer immediately and get it out of my house. But again, Ligotti does this great job of setting up this quiet suburban home that was a sanctuary, that they actually say words to that effect. This is an inviolate place. No one gets in. And then the talk of the guy got in, and then the wife physically invites the man in with this object. Was the guy like a spirit? Now I'm getting to the speculative fiction part of the story. I don't know what's there. It's like, did he manifest because he physically was invited to the home? Was he invited to the home because you were talking about it? Or is there just a more prosaic explanation? It's not a very big town, and I found out where you live, and I stole your kid.
Yeah, David says it's possible that somebody else that works at the prison that knows David personally could have spilled the beans and told him that he has a family and that he lives close by.
Why anyone would do that is beyond my comprehension. I have friends who have
Yeah.
worked in the prison system. You do not engage on that level. That's just not a
Don't
thing.
tell people that might have a vendetta against you something. Ligotti writes, he enunciated his words in one of his affected accents, Scottish this time, with a little German flavor thrown in. What he said, and I'm reciting it verbatim, was this. You wouldn't be having a misbehaving laddie, nor a little Colleen of your own, now would you, Professor von Monk? He's trying to say that it's grammatically incorrect. He should not say nor. He should have said or. So there's no reason for him to have said that unless he was trying to send him a coded message that's like Nor and Colleen, Norleen, because it's a weird name. If that is what he was doing, don't know, because that doesn't feel like it would be a threat to me, but it was enough to him because he is already experiencing this paranoia. He's obviously going to start jumping to conclusions for other things. I mean, in the end, he's right.
When you said that, I was thinking it's a panorama of paranoia is something that I could see Ligotti saying those words, because he just does this really interesting juxtaposition of putting a negative word next to a positive word just to kind of throw you off your game. And I'm going to leave it to the readers to find those little gems when they read the story themselves. But that was very notable when I was thinking about his vocabulary. He jams words together that the power of the words don't match and the tone of the words doesn't match. But when he puts them together, it's exquisite. I understand exactly the dissonance you're trying to instill in me and making me a little off center, thinking, those words don't go together. And if they do, the world is messed up. And he's like, yes, indeed, the world is messed up and I did the messing.
Yeah, I think that's the moral of the story, is for Ligotti to be like, it's pretty messed up out there, and if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss it. But before we wrap up, I wanted to just read the note that John Doe leaves in the little Bambi doll that he mutilates. Dr. Monk read the note from inside the animal. We leave this behind in your capable hands, for in the black foaming gutters and back alley of paradise, a dank windowless gloom of some intergalactic cellar, in the hollow, pearly worlds found in sewer-like seas, in starless cities of insanity and in their slums, my awestruck little dear and I have gone frolicking. See you anon, Jonathan Doe. So, funny that he gives himself the name Jonathan instead of John now, because he has 1,000 names, so he could have that name as well. We never know. First of all, is a cryptic message, because we already have learned that John Doe, or No Name, has these fantasy worlds that, whether or not he has access to them, I don't know. If this is speculative, I'm not sure, that he believes he is taking his victims to. And David tries to explain it by saying, like, he's probably not frolicking in a meadow. It's probably the sewer. It's probably not as great as you think. It's interesting that he says we. There is a duality there. He's multitudinous, I should say. I don't want to say it's cosmic horror, but I do know that he's inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, who was a racist because he's dead. But he is the father of cosmic horror. So it makes sense that that could potentially be the reason why John Doe is the way he is because maybe he's not from Earth and he's a cosmic horrific creature. But I don't think so. I think from what you read in the beginning that Thomas Ligotti was like, this is a normal story.
I'm going to push back on that, Joey, because I was thinking, based on the text, that it was an otherworldly creature, because he said where you were born, and he's like, it doesn't matter. And he's like, when were you born? I don't know. They said that he has no record. There's no fingerprints in the system. He just is not attached to anything that they can figure out. And David said in the story, it doesn't matter. It's a formality now to find his name because his victims are dead. The damage has been done. And so for me, I really got that little tiny tickle in the back of my brain going like, this is from another time and place and possibly planet, but it is not a standard human being. And David said in his clinical evaluation, maybe this person is suffering from multiple personality disorder. Or because we can write the story any way we want, maybe this person is the physical embodiment of this big cloud of evil. He's all the evil men from all the time. He just pops up from time to time. Joey, I laughed when you were reading the part where he's like, I can get out of here anytime I want. I actually came here on vacation. I want to interact with the other inmates and they won't let me. That's just really mean that you won't let me go play with my friends. And I just thought it was very funny because Ligotti put it into David's mouth. These are just run of the mill, everyday humdrum murderers, rapists, car thieves. They're just the normal. This guy is not one of those. It was just such an interesting normalization of we have grade A criminals, and then we have another layer of criminals, the A plus plus criminals, and you're not ready to handle them.
Yeah, I think you could read this story on either level, as if you wanted to read it as speculative horror and No Name John Doe is actually a legion, or you could read it as like this man is suffering from some type of psychosis, thinks he's multitudinous, and just escapes. I don't know how.
Joey, I don't read cosmic horror. So when you said, I'm like, what are you even talking about? So I did catch up by context. I did catch up. But it occurred to me, this felt a little bit like the ring shout evil that
Mhm.
came into existence, that it's not really explained, but you better believe it's true because it is right there in front of your face. So it just had that little bit of an echo for me of, I don't have to explain to you as the author where evil comes from because you've seen it and you know it's out there and you've seen the damage that it's doing to this community. So just really, really curious how all of our stories somehow magically weave themselves together.
Yeah, definitely ring shout that aspect is cosmic horror, like creatures from outer space kind of thing. So it makes sense that this person or creature is unknowable because in reality we don't really know what else is really out there in really deep space. So it makes sense, and that's terrifying for some people. I don't find it terrifying that something in like shout or in this story. I'm not saying it's a possibility, but in the stories it's a possibility that a creature from somewhere out in the universe can make its way onto Earth and wreak havoc.
Yes, Joey, I completely agree with you on that. And I would love to end this where we started with the book ending. So I would love to read the final paragraph just as an enticement for people to pick up this collection. We've only read the first story, so I'm hoping that we will revisit additional stories in the future. But I just thought it was really very interesting how he leaves us after finding the note and the Bambi destroyed. So we ended it with his wife. His wife was the first to speak in the story, and she's also the last to speak. David, he heard his wife's voice inquire from the bottom of the stairs, "Is everything all right?" Then the beautiful house was no longer quiet, for there rang a bright, freezing scream of laughter, the perfect sound to accompany a passing antidote to the obscure hell. So we just have this cosmic, because now I'm just loving that term, cosmic scream from the other world, just laughing in your face that you thought you were so smart and so smug and so educated and so safe. And I took the one thing that meant the most to you that can never be put back. I win.
Yeah, what an unsettling way to end the story too, because we're like, where is that coming from? Because it's a laughter. It's not a scream. It's a screaming laughter. So is it from David, or is John Doe close by and he's like, ha ha ha, I see you discovered my plan and it's too late. I'm too far away, close enough for you to hear me laugh. But we don't know. Or you're saying with cosmic horror, it could be something from the abyss has come out and is now left behind somehow. We don't know.
Maybe it came from that little blue head that he fashioned that she brought into her sacred space. And I think that was a mistake, kind of like Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Just don't call it because it will
Yeah.
come.
Yeah.
Awesome, Joey. So the Summer of Madness 2025 edition continues. And I look forward to seeing you then.